Welcome once again to the High Performance Human Podcast. It's your man Andy here, and this, I will admit, is take two on this latest guest because I, like an idiot, lost our first recording, and there was so much value in it because this guy, as self-effacing as he is one of the genuine humans that I've had the fortune of meeting. Is an extremely talented individual, incredibly knowledgeable, insanely humble, and has a sense of humor that can rival pretty much anyone. Peter Schravemade is the managing partner for Reach ASEA, and as such leads his team to drive growth and entrepreneurship in 36 companies in the greater Asia Pacific region for the Second Century Ventures, partnered with the National Association of Realtors. Basically, team, he heads up a bit of a VC fund that really looks to help develop, nurture, incubate incredible ideas into reality for the betterment of not only real estate, but anything associated with that as well. Pete, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on board for a second time. We can technically say that you're the first ever second guest on the show. But we'll just say that the first one was for a very, very VIP audience of one.
I don't mind doing it again, and thank you for having me for a second time. I feel privileged to be here. I don't actually mind. Actually, I like talking to you, Andy, as you know.
That always helps, right? That always helps. Like I said, team, Pete he is very much at the forefront of. Well, one of the best things that I like about Pete is, yes, he is technology focused and technology minded, but the thing that makes, and I don't really want to blow smoke up your trumpet, my friend, but the thing that makes you as good as how I perceive you to be is the level of humanity that you approach these tech-based solutions is the thing that makes it as good as it is. It makes this project of Reach as good as it is, and it makes your leadership as good as it is. I really do genuinely believe that. So, but for the few people that don't know who you are, can you give us a bit of a genesis, my man, as to who you are and your background and how you ended up in the position that you're in?
Yeah, look, I started in real estate, and we're talking 1998. So what's that, 20, 25, 26 odd years ago? And I rose through the ranks, I suppose you would say. I started in residential real estate and went through. I became a principal. We had 16 offices throughout Queensland. I exited that and went into the hotel franchise. I was the operations manager for a hotel franchise for the better part of 5 years. And then I came across a property technology company called Box Brownie, and I joined that. That company did exceptionally well, I think, in Australian and international terms. And then on leaving that, I was invited to be a part of the Second Century Ventures Reach program, which wasn't really known well down under at the time, I don't think. Didn't have so much of a profile. Massive over in the US. And the linkage there is that Box Brownie had been selected to be part of the venture capital fund, which is Second Century Ventures in the North American market. We were the first ever property technology company from Australia chosen. And shortly after we were chosen, they decided to start these programs in Australia and New Zealand. And so I had a predecessor called Shelley who was running that down here, and she departed the program and I took over. But suffice to say, I've had a extensive history in the area of real estate and technology. It's always fused its way through those careers. I won't go into depth or detail on that, but it's fused its way into all of those areas. And now I feel like this job is handpicked or written for me, especially at the stage of my life. And I'm surrounded by an incredible team. I'm lucky enough to have my wife as the director. And not many people say that when they're working with their wife, but I'll hand across my heart. Honestly, we have our trials and tribulations, but we really enjoy it. And then I've also got Tom Ellis, who's Australia's foremost funding, finance, merger and acquisition guy. And so the three of us get on like a house on fire. We really enjoy running the program. We're charged with identifying new forms of technology, investing in those, and then accelerating them. And that, in a nutshell, is what it is.
Mm,
I also have a job where, or part of the function of my job for Asia Pacific is to grow the REACH program or grow REACH programs throughout Asia Pacific, and we're in the process of looking at that now.
mm.
But yeah, I have immense joy and fun doing what I do.
In your role, how much? Because we spoke about this a few weeks ago, and I'll if it's okay, I would like to ask you a little bit about the numbers that Reach sort of deals with and entertains and whatnot, because obviously, as is the case with a boom in anything, boom in industry, boom in whatever, a boom in technology means there's lots of people with ideas that they want to get off the ground and what have you. How many ideas do you think are pitched to you in any given year?
Yeah, look, we've seen a lot, especially in previous years. I would have seen nearly 400 to 500 previously, and I'm just talking about the ones that actually get to a pitch kind of stage. Then there are loads that hit me up on LinkedIn, and we kind of siphon those out early. There's a lot more of them
Mm,
coming from, I might have built a property technology in Malaysia that has no real play at the Australian New Zealand market.
mm,
That's of little interest to me. That's not inside of my brief. So
mm.
I'll kind of separate it from that. But there are lots that pitch. This year there's been actually very few. I would highlight the quality over the quantity this year. It's been really surprising. We're seeing one banger after another, but we're not seeing as many as in the previous years, and that kind of stuns me with the rise of generative AI. I
Yeah.
feel like I should have been seeing more.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that's
It
kind of
is, yeah.
opposite to what you would have thought, right?
It's exactly the opposite to what I would have thought. I mean, it could have something to do with our recruitment process, or could have something to do with the fact that over the past year, a lot of the venture capital firms, the bigger ones, like that hand out massive checks, they have had their hands in their pockets, to be quite frank. They haven't been investing in anything, not in the property technology circuit anyway.
Mm. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's not as many crews coming your way? Like what can you pin it on?
Well, I think it has to do with the funding. They're not actually getting the funding. As far as I know, here in Australia, we're one of maybe only three that are actively seeking to fund. And
Right.
that, that's a far cry from 4 years ago when there were like 20 or 25 in the
Mm.
market throwing big checks at people. There was a property management firm here who attracted 24 million only 4 years ago that are now they're now not operating anymore. But
Wow.
that kind of funding amount is insane for an
Yep.
Australian property.
Yeah, for sure, man. So it's just a perception. Everybody just thinks that the VCs have shut up shop. So,
Well, there is that. And at the time, if you think 4 years ago, that's, on the end of the pandemic. But at the start of the pandemic, people started pulling money out of other assets and putting it into, you know, maybe things they saw as more secure. And prop tech was one of them.
yeah, true.
So that's largely dried up now. And we're in a different phase where if you're building a prop tech, you really have to value it at what it actually is rather than some of the valuations that I see thrown around previously.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And now, there's a few questions I wanted to ask around your role, with respect to how you guide the human piece of these ventures, right? So, but before I do that, question that I always ask everybody is what their definition of a high performance human is. As I always state, team, four elements to a high performance human being: success, connection, influence, and happiness, and they all exist in an ecosystem where one can't survive without the other. Pete, before we came on this, before we hit record on this one, he said to me that a lot of the common themes would have been consistency, discipline, and all the rest of it. And he says that he's got a slightly different slant on it. So, Pete, what is your definition of a high performance human?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of the other people who I've heard on this podcast and I've
Mhm.
heard live, talk about consistency and discipline. But one that I don't hear very often that I think's a super essential ingredient and really it makes the mix a lot better is belief or belief in oneself. And that's not to be confused with confidence. I think confidence is a very, very different thing. Confidence can be dependent on the way you feel at the time. It can be dependent on how you've performed over the last couple of days. It
Mm,
can be dependent on your stability, your emotional stability, or where at stage in the development you are. But self belief is something that I think it is a hallmark of nearly all of the high performance humans I've looked at, and it's one that's not discussed very often.
true.
Um, I think because it can be quite personal. Your self belief can be drawn from different sources. You know, some draw self belief from religion.
Mm,
Others draw it from, it might be the historic background of what they've done in the past. Some, go into they use their self belief as though it's I can conquer everything. You know, there's nothing in front of me that can stop me. And I don't really share that kind of self belief. I share, if you like, a realistic self belief, and that doesn't mean that I roll over and play dead when I see a challenge coming. I think all my life I've taken on challenges and
absolutely.
thoroughly enjoyed it. But I think there's a realism there, like there's the self-belief of I can overcome cancer, and we see that quite a lot in society, and then that doesn't eventuate out. To me, quite often, depending on the stage of cancer, that's a unrealistic self-belief. And I understand why people have it. They almost have to have it to try and take it on.
Mm,
If that makes sense to you. But self-belief, I've seen people with so much more potential than I have, and so much more discipline, so much more consistency, but without self-belief, and they have not done the things, they have not realized the potential of who they could be, is the way I would put it. So I place a lot of emphasis on true self-belief, not saying I'm confident in myself. It's not necessarily an arrogance. It is I feel comfortable in the skin I'm in. I know the parameters for what I believe. I know, the extent of my limitations, but I also know I can push myself to greater heights. I watch you do boxing, and I have a skerrick of information as to how much training and self-belief that kind of takes. And I sit there and I go, well, Andy has self-belief. You would not be able to pull that off if you did not believe in yourself to to a certain extent. To get into the ring with somebody, especially, where you're not necessarily considered to be a professional. Sorry to sorry to throw that out there, but it is
I'm not going to be headlining Wembley anytime soon, mate. Don't you worry about that. No, 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 no.
but it takes an incredible amount of self-belief. Yes, and all the other things are there. You probably can tell me about the discipline and the consistency required to get there, and the mental toughness. I think the mental toughness is symptomatic of the self-belief that you have, that, I'm going to achieve this, and I'm fully capable of doing it. So I place a lot in self-belief. And I'll throw one more thing in there. I heard this last week. I mentioned to you off air that I was at a conference, and it was in the sexy topic of parking. Such is my world. But it was a wonderful conference, and one of the takeaways I had is there's a guy speaking there, lovely fella by the name of Ellis Taylor. Have you ever heard of him, Andy?
No.
He's a recruitment expert in the property technology industry, I guess you would call it. And he was talking about how in recruitment AI has changed everything.
Mm.
At the moment, you have artificial intelligence creating CVs. He said the CVs are dead. You've got artificial intelligence creating CVs. You've got artificial intelligence assessing CVs. So effectively, you've got robots deciding what they're going to say about somebody. Like, do you see the loop that's happening there? It's quite funny when he put it together, because he said,
Yeah, true.
nearly 100% of it is now the CV's being created by a robot and now being assessed. So what, when it doesn't work,
So true.
did you use the wrong prompt? So he was saying that one of the things that he now goes looking for, and this is a real thing in the area of recruitment, is they start assessing on personality and culture. And the backbone of that is self-belief. what I think he was pointing at, he didn't use it directly, but a lot of the people who aren't getting the gigs at the moment don't have the self-belief in the moment to go, I actually believe I'm right for this role, and this is how I think I fit in.
Mm.
So I see it across, the permutations of it. I see it across everywhere. I think we operate in an industry of agents who tend to be super confident, but it's only the ones with the self-belief who end up with longevity in the industry and doing well. The super confident ones can be knocked by a bad season, by a bad market, by a run of poor performances as an auctioneer, maybe,
Mm.
or whatever it may be.
Mm.
There is something there. There is a roadblock that stops people achieving longevity in our industry. And the hallmark of all of the ones that I see do well is they have a self-belief. And that self-belief might be that they can run a business. It might be that they going to wake up the next day and they're going to find that next listing and that next sale. But we live like farmers in this industry. We might be having a great season over here, and we have to save that up because at some point the market will turn and the buyer's tap will turn off. And it's the self-belief that you have when the market turns and it's hard that actually drives you to operate better. So I think you can apply it to everything. I think there's a lot of industries where this is proven to be true, and I firmly believe it is in the hallmark of a lot of the people who are top performers.
It's a very, very, very interesting topic that can go a couple of different ways, actually. And I think we'll go in a couple of different ways with this because and by the way, team, just before we dig into this, notice how what I said before about Peter being one of the real leaders of a technology space in a very, very big industry. And yet that is probably one of the more human answers that I've had on the show to date, which sort of highlights my point that this guy he's one of the most humane individuals you'll ever likely to meet. Now, with this self-belief
What
thing,
can I link that in? Can I link those two things in? When we go assessing technology, yes, we assess the technology, we assess the market fit, we assess the unique sales proposition, but I have seen some excellent, fantastic tech ideas never get off the ground because the leadership of the whoever it is running it uh, do not have the self-belief, do not have the way forward. Like there is an incredibly human element to technology. A lot of it's networking. Here at Reach, we actually identify three things that we need in a good property technology leadership.
mm,
One of them is a visionary. The secondary part of that is we need somebody who is technologically highly versed. And then the third thing is we need a salesperson. Now we've seen teams with only one of them or two of them, and they do okay. The ones who actually rock it off quite consistently, they have that third element, and generally that third element, the one that they all tend to miss, is the sales element with a self belief that we can actually make this happen. So that they do actually tie. Just because they tie in, just because I look at technology, I also look at the human aspect behind the technology to assess as to whether there's a likelihood of success further down the track.
now let's just sit in that one for a little bit because I think when we look at technology specifically, and you said that a lot of the time it's the sales piece that is missing. Is it fair to say that they might have a self-belief in the technology? So the belief in the technology is there. However, where the lack of self-belief comes from is in their language and communication to be able to translate it in a way that other people can understand and believe in. Is that potentially got something to do with it?
I think the technology experts have a self belief in their own ability.
Yeah.
Whether they have confidence in their product is a completely separate thing.
Right.
But you are highlighting the lack of communication skills that sometimes we get in property technology companies where they can't traverse market fit. They can't go to Andy and go, "Hey, I've got this amazing auction app. is this going to work for you? Can you talk to me? Here is what it does in layman's terms. Can you talk to me about whether it's a market fit for you? And can you give me pointers on where I might have gone right or wrong? Now, that is a communication piece. Um, I feel as though the self-belief in property technology companies really comes from understanding of the market and your one's ability to communicate the product effectively to the target audience for whom you are selling to. I feel it's very similar to auctions. And correct me if I'm wrong, I've never done one. I'd never got my license, had considered it, but your ability to communicate the product that you're selling to the people in front of you and read that audience and respond on the fly, that comes from a self-belief, and not necessarily a confidence, because on the day people can knock your confidence down.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen you, I've seen you do auctioneering contests, which are like highly stressful. And then the only thing that gets those people through is a self-belief. They are highly skilled, highly trained experts in the area. Confidence only counts for one skerrick when people are adding, cents in the dollar 46 times, interrupting your line of thought. All of the traps that they throw at you, and I've seen them do it at auction contests.
Mm.
It's a self-belief. It's a self-belief that drives those people to get through. Very, very similar to any kind of product that you're selling to a public or a consumer-based audience.
Now, when let's stick on the topic of language, because you mentioned that you mentioned briefly in your initial volley around this whole question, that you said that you mentioned the word arrogance, and in self-belief, there is a fine line between self-belief and the way it's portrayed, whether it is represented in a confident way or whether it is just perceived as a really arrogant thing. Now, you could argue that self-belief is almost the subconscious language, right? It's almost like a subconscious thing where you could attribute it to an aura. If someone has got a self-belief, then the aura that they have around them is one of being knowing that they know that they are exactly where they're supposed to be and they are exactly who they're supposed to be, and very much in that moment, and then the communication of that self-belief determines how it's received, right? So whether people think that it's confidence or arrogance or humility or whatever the case may be, however it's packaged. In your
Hang on. Absolutely.
In your opinion, mate, when it comes to this, because I think that sometimes because of this misinterpretation, sometimes someone's self-belief can actually be to their detriment based on their lack of awareness around how it's being perceived, right?
Oh, very good. Very good. Yes.
Now, in your humble opinion, having you've hung around with, and you are in yourself, having hung around with loads and loads of high performers, where do you think that the ones that get it to the ones that don't, where do you think that little gap is? What do you think is missing in the ones that don't get it?
Well, you're looking at very finite changes. So, self-belief is one thing, and it definitely can come across as confidence and arrogance because your delivery is not correct. You talked about the ability to communicate and understand humans, and sometimes people with self-belief don't get that. And the thing that I'd like to open the conversation up to is there is healthy self-belief and there's unhealthy self-belief.
Yep.
We have people who have committed mass genocide on the back of unhealthy self-belief.
Yeah.
They can be doing it for all the right reasons in the back of their head, but they're missing the fact that they're not grounded in reality. They probably don't have the ability to adapt and grow. You spoke about relationship and humility. They probably don't have that. The dependence on external validation can be broken. Can we look at a couple of instances where people who have misplaced self-belief have not looked at the external validation of is what I'm doing right? In Queensland recently, we had a few police officers killed by people who truly believed, that the end was nigh, and and they had gone down a rabbit hole, and they didn't have external validation of whether what we are doing is correct. And you know, had pretty much torn themselves from reality. They lived out in the middle of nowhere. So there is a sense of where we get this wrong. Like, self-belief is not the be all and end all. It's how you temper that self-belief with the reality of the people in front of you. And every day I sit down in front of people who have both good and very, very bad property technology ideas. And you know, I'm conscious of the fact that you don't want to shoot any of them down. You want to listen to all of the ideas that they have in front of them. And at the end of them, even if you don't like them, you need to give them the honesty and the time of day and the you know, the permission to still follow what they do without affecting the future outcome of what's there. And that doesn't mean I'm dishonest. Sometimes I sit down in front of prop tech ideas and go, hey, like, I don't really like this solution, and here are the reasons why. You know, congratulations for building and what you've built, and I wish you the best for the future. If I was going along these lines, here is the direction I would take. You know, and I think that's what makes us different about a venture capital company, is that we always give feedback to the people that are there. But back to your point, healthy self-belief and unhealthy self-belief, sometimes there can be a fine line between the two. So you know, the high performance humans, you definitely want a healthy form of self-belief. Just speak to any of the athletes that are out there. They ooze in self-belief.
It's one of those ones though where self-belief this is such an interesting topic. Look at athletes, for example. There's another point I want to come back to, but if we stick on athletes for a moment, you can argue that their self-belief creates such a narrow focus on what's important in their lives that that self-belief ends up being to the detriment of loved ones, of family, it leads to neglect, because they're so hyper focused on their self-belief that they need to be on the track at that time, doing that thing, and performing in that way. And you can argue that self-belief does then, although at the coalface it is representing a tremendously healthy self-belief because they're achieving, you know, gold medals or whatever the case may be. But you look at that self-belief in another aspect of their life, you just shift the perspective camera just like 45 degrees off to one way and point it in a different part of their life. And that self-belief, that same self-belief, ends up becoming extremely detrimental.
Yeah. So in all of those scenarios, you need to look at what's important to you. You know, that's where you derive your self-belief from, and that's not always a good place. We see that a lot in real estate agents. I've grown very tired of 25 years listening to real estate gurus getting up and saying you need to wake up at 5 in the morning and go for a run and hustle and grind and do yoga. Yeah. And then you need to jump into a cold plunge pool. Then you need to do your mindfulness thoughts of the day. By 8:15, you're having an acai bowl and yogurt. And by 8:30, you're in the process of 30 different calls, heavily scripted. But the reality is you laugh because you've heard this before.
Yes.
Now those people I liken to the high performance athletes who, and some of them are incredibly successful at their gigs. There's a hustle and there's a grind behind these people, and they push forward. And you know that where they're deriving their self-belief from is success in business. That's where they're trying to go with that. But I have learned that success in business in that direction means that you're sacrificing something that you may not want to sacrifice, and that's what you spoke about with the athletes before. You know, do you want an Olympic gold medal at the sake of losing your family and your friends? Some people's answer to that is yes, and I wish them well in that. They probably need that self-belief to be in the top, you know, 1, 2, or 3 in the world at what they do, maybe. So there are other people who achieve it very, very differently. And we see the same in real estate. Where you derive your beliefs from actually dictates who you are as a person. Now for me, I don't think I got the balance right. I am on the record as saying I traveled over 300 days a year with a wife and 3 kids. that doesn't have a good impact on anyone's life. Not mine, not my kids, not my wife. Now, fortunately, we're still together. We've been able to sort, differences out and move on as a married couple. And now my life revolves around spending time more with my kids than necessarily doing my job. And if I could have, my time again, maybe I would have done it differently, but I don't. And so at the time, I believed in growing the product that I was there. I believed in the journey that I was on. My wife did too, in all honesty. She will tell you that she believed in it, but you may change what dictates your self-belief through life. It's never going to be the same. I'd like to say maturity has to do with it. Experience has to do with it. The stage of your life, you might be a young buck and hustle and grind is all for you. You might be sitting here listening going, I wake up at 5 a.m. I have my cold plunge pool. I do these yoga and acai bowls. I'm not saying that's bad. I understand why you're doing what you are doing, and it's the self-belief that will drive you to achieve better.
It really is. Self-belief and that intrinsic understanding of purpose is it's so hand in hand, right? Because a lot of the time we get taken over, shall we say, for want of a better phrase, by that self-belief. And it can be based on, you get told a whole bunch of times that you're how good you are at something, or you get that validation through your bank balance growing exponentially and all these sorts of things. And those pieces of validation goes towards, as you mentioned, goes towards growing that self-belief that you are on the right track. But we can end up becoming naive to our entire lives and having that ability for perspective. And I think on the topic of validation, it sort of ties in quite nicely with what I was going to go to. On the topic of validation, external validation, a lot of the time we only really ever talk about it in a negative connotation, right? There's the fact that external validation on social media platforms is contributing towards negative mental health, is contributing towards lack of identity, lack of personal identity as well, because your identity is forged by the level of popularity that one thing that you've said is holds over another thing based on the vanity metrics of an Instagram account, right? But it's interesting, and you're absolutely spot on. I think you're absolutely spot on. I believe that, as we've talked about, there's a healthy and an unhealthy self-belief. I think there is a healthy and an unhealthy validation as well, because we are human beings, and it's one of those ones that, and you hear it all the time. There's a reason why coaches exist, because when you're in the field of play and when you're in the middle of doing something, when you're in the middle of running your business, it's really hard to gain that perspective that allows you to see the whole picture, right? Coaches are stood on the sidelines for a reason, because they see the whole game, because they're not in it, and therefore they can direct traffic to a much more productive end. I believe, and it's really a good point that highlights the need for us all to have these people that validate us, whether it's to validate us that we're going in the right direction, or validators in the sense of, look, you mean well, you got to be careful though, because what about this part of your life? What about that part of your life? Really making sure that we've got a guide on what's really, truly, deeply important to us as human beings. And then that, in essence, sort of comes back as a cycle, because in order to have self-belief, realistically, the healthy self-belief is having a true understanding of what's important to you. And irrespective of whether externally it is good or not, ultimately, if it means, if you feel in yourself that is a healthy self-belief, you're going to go with it. Right.
Yeah. Well, or you're going to find out, from society it's not, It's like, I think accountability with self-belief is super important. I think anybody who will speak about their self-belief, if you read Steve Jobs' books, for example, he had an incredible amount of self-belief, despite being an introvert, which is very, very interesting. But he was held to account by those he loved around him, they would always pull him up and go, I think you're going the wrong direction. And behind every person, man, woman, child with self-belief, there is generally somebody holding them to account privately, which is a big tip for that.
Now, Jordan Peterson talks about, we can refer this self-belief topic to something that Jordan Peterson talks about, which is those that are able to really tame the monster within them. And I think it's more so, I think it might be more of a male archetype as opposed to a female archetype in terms of the context that he talks about it in. But he talks about how those that suppress their monster, or they ignore their inner monster, or whatever, they generally tend to be relatively weak and meek in their characteristics, and they don't really sort of hold any serious value to society. And then on the flip side of that, those whose monsters are just completely out of control end up being incredibly detrimental towards society in an external sense. So it's almost like internal versus external. And that understanding of what your inner monster is, and being able to have complete control over that, is where the sweet spot is. And you could argue that self-belief, it is a beast that can go one way or another depending on how you look after it, right? Because as we've shown, there's plenty of people with self-belief that do horrible things. Horrible.
Yeah. But I mean, it comes through every area of your life. Like, I have a dear friend of mine. I grew up in the small central Queensland town of Rockhampton. I have a dear friend of mine who lives in that town who's never really gone more than 150 kilometers away. And at the end of the day, that's self-belief. How about I buy a plane ticket to Brisbane and just test the waters? And you're probably the same. Like, you probably return home and go, there's people still here.
Yeah.
We haven't left all of our lives, and maybe other people might point to drive or whatever, but at some stage, you must have the self-belief to think that there's something bigger than the small little bubble that you've grown up in. And I'm not throwing stones at Rockhampton. I'm just saying that there's a whole world out there that we can get to know. There's a whole new perspective. And mine is definitely not always right, and certainly won't be further down the track. Self-belief is what holds me to the account of who I am, and holds me to the core values that I hold dear to me, and you will have some as well, that you hold dear to you, and they're not always the same. And part of the fun of this learning experience is to meet other humans and go, what is it that drives you? And I see your discipline, I see your consistency, I see these things that make a great leader. But the one thing that I think we all have like fingerprints, it's never the same, is what is it that we really hold core value to us deep down inside, that drives us to be who we are. And that kind of thing draws us to different humans. We get on like a house on fire, really. I don't know why, but if it could be, it could be that we actually hold a lot of things that are very similar, dear to us, and that when we come together, that is what we have in common, and we share those common beliefs, even though they're not necessarily spoken about.
Yep.
So, I think it's even deeper than just, hey, these are the things that drive you, and these are the things that motivate you, and these are the things that your kind of must-haves. I actually think they help draw us to people who are like-minded industry-wise, and that makes us closer as a community and as a group and moving forward.
Well, I think, and it sort of ties in with what I mentioned earlier, that self-belief it could be labeled as a bit of a subconscious communication, right? There's a subconscious thing that, it can be unspoken. And I think that self-belief, I think one of the traps that people fall into when it comes to demonstrating their self-belief is that sometimes they feel they have to demonstrate it, or they have to communicate how confident they are, and then it turns into arrogance automatically.
I think that's confidence. I think that's misplaced confidence. I won't say who, because they may listen to this, but I have a friend who has always appeared as super confident all their life,
Mm.
and that person has come up to me recently and said, I'm not all that confident. What I'm lacking is self-belief. And so I put on this pantomime when I get up in front of people,
Mm.
and they all think it's confidence. But at the end of the day, I hate myself. I'm not happy with where I'm at.
Oh wow.
And that person shows all of the hallmarks of confidence. They highly successful at what they do, but in their own room at home, when they're sitting there thinking about it, they lack the self-belief that is essential to drive that confidence forward.
Interesting, man. And it's almost like it almost turns into a bit of a house of cards, doesn't it? If you haven't got that inherent self belief, then whatever you're using, whether it's confidence, whether it's humor, whether it's passion or whatever, energy to try and paper over that fairly sizable crack, essentially, it's all going to be on very, very flimsy foundations that could all come crashing down. If you
Yeah, and it does because it's
Mm.
emotion, or it's driven by the particular status that you are in at the moment, and it
Mm.
doesn't take much to then for that person to then start questioning themselves. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, why am
Yeah.
I doing this? If I'm not enjoying it and I get home and I'm unhappy with myself, why am I doing it? And it comes back to your core values of self-belief. And I don't think we talk about it enough.
No, we
I
don't.
don't think I don't think we raise conversations like we've never discussed it before.
No.
And there's a bunch of people in the industry have never talked about self-belief. It's kind of one of those things that's almost the antithesis of what we do when we gather together. So
Do you reckon that that's because we are like in the real estate space, we are built on an industry of confidence, right?
absolutely.
We're supposed to be made of Teflon, right?
Yep.
Nothing bloody sticks, right? And if we were to even whisper it, the topic of self-belief, then
Mm.
there's a whole bunch of people that could come crumbling down real fast.
Well, it's almost like if you don't have it, it's a chink in the armor. But the people who
Mm.
do have it, they have this quiet confidence in themselves. I can hear constructive criticism about myself and self-analyze and go,
Mm.
was that correct?
Mm.
Yeah, that probably right. I didn't do what I was supposed to do, or I failed somebody in this particular sense. I can be honest with myself and look back on, what many people call the crowning jewel of my career, the growth I did for Box Brownie, and go, it probably wasn't that smart in retrospect.
Mm.
If I'm honest, I didn't get that right. I didn't get my priorities right for that period. It's the
Mm.
ability to have a look at that but not fall in a crumbling heap going, oh, woe is me, I've done the wrong thing. Like, I'm not going to live in the past. I'm not going to let the ghosts of yesterday dictate who I am today.
Mm.
It's the self-belief that allows you to pick yourself up, make yourself better, and move yourself forward. And yet you're right. We live in this industry where some people won't show you a mistake. Like, they almost act like they don't make them.
Yeah,
And
100%.
and
You just look at how people and let's face it, it's not like an agent's going to go out there and say to their community, "Hey, we just sold 123 Smith Street. It was a really average price, and it was a nightmare to sell. For more
didn't get it right. Yeah.
for information, contact me." Like, imagine if we
I
did.
want to I want to see that.
Oh man, well, we've almost had an entire conversation and not talked about one thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's part of the beauty of you as a human being, my man, is that this conversation around self-belief is a conversation that needs to be started, not just in the real estate space. This needs to be started across the board, man. It really, really does. It needs to be a lot louder. Chris Elder talks about useful beliefs, and I'm wondering how that connects with self-belief as well, because the way he talks about belief systems and whatnot, it's all around how you analyze, kind of like what you just said before, how you analyze information, and whether you use it constructively or whether you use it destructively within your life. But the core fundamentals of your belief system, those pillars, values, purpose, those sorts of things, because values have been bastardized by not just real, but like corporations all over the world have bastardized the crap out of it and turned them into whipping stick KPIs, right? But we've got to really bring this down to fundamentals, because I think society does have a problem with identity.
Yeah. You raised it before. You were talking about social media.
Yeah.
It's almost, these influencers on TikTok and Instagram. And I won't say they're all of this way. Some of them are running businesses, highly successful businesses, but a large percentage of them have confidence without self-belief. They feel validated by the comments that they get on social media, and the crushing thing for those people is those comments turn so quickly. I heard Wayne Bennett, the master coach of the rugby league community, talk about social media, because the interesting thing about Wayne is he doesn't consider himself to be a football coach. He talks about being a coach of developing. What he's really good at is developing young boys into young men. That's what he talks about. He talks about the human aspect behind it.
Wow.
And somebody asked him, well, how do you deal with these guys on social media? And his response was priceless. Like, so dry. He goes, I don't know why you'd go and get on a platform where everyone wants to tell you what you did wrong during the game. Like, I don't know why you would put yourself up for that kind of abuse. And he said, all I can gather is that these young men derive their confidence from the way they performed on the particular night. And he said, and the reality is you're going to have a bad game at some point.
Yeah.
So unless you have the self-belief to be on social media, you probably shouldn't be there. And it was just a crowning moment. That's exactly right. And that's what's wrong. This is why we're looking at social media bans for our kids. They haven't yet developed their belief structure to know what they should believe. And they're highly impressionable.
Yeah.
And if we're teaching them that their sense of validation comes from whatever Instagram is saying or TikTok is saying about you on the day, we're doing it all wrong. Let's work with our young folk on their belief structure. Why do you believe what you believe? What do you hold to be true in your heart of hearts? And how do you direct your behavior, your consistency, your discipline around those things?
100%, man. You know what? I think we're going to need a part 3, because two things. One, I'm definitely not bloody losing this episode. I'm telling you that for him for nothing. I am not moving my ass from this chair until I've got this saved somewhere safe. But I really want to dig into the whole dichotomy of how of human work versus, I say human work versus the work of technology, but because a lot of people do see it as a dichotomy, and they see it as two opposing forces in many respects. You are very much of a mindset that allows people to flourish if they could understand what that mindset would be. And I would really like to dig into that with you on another chat, if that's okay. But I think this conversation about self-belief is one that I'm so glad that we've hopefully started for a few people, and hopefully maybe give people a nudge and give organizations a nudge to really sort of have the thought of just taking a deep breath and actually looking under their hood of confidence, and seeing what is actually lying underneath. And
Absolutely.
Yeah,
if all today does is start that conversation, Andy, then happy days.
We've done all right. We've done all right, mate. Thank you so much. And now one last thing before I let you go is I love to ask all of my esteemed guests this question, because you guys, everybody that's been on my show, I've been so grateful and fortunate to have on, because you're all amazing in your own right. But as we all search for our next level of high performance, there's always things that we're all working on as well. So right now, could you give us one thing that you're currently working on within yourself when it comes to how you can better your version of high performance?
Yeah, I definitely think, we spoke about high performance humans and I said consistency and discipline. At the moment, I would have to say it's discipline for me. It's difficult. I have found it difficult working from home to be as disciplined as I need to be in order to execute as a high performance human, if you want to call it that. I struggle with that concept, but
Yeah.
for me, definitely discipline is something that I have to work on. And I threw shade at people who get up out of bed. I read this book. I can't remember the name of it, but it was something about why you should make your bed in the morning,
Mm.
and and it was very much around, this is a routine that you get into, and it's not really about the bed. It's about setting yourself up for a day, and moving forward. But I find whether it's a hangover from undiagnosed attention deficit disorder, which
Mm.
I've had about 300 humans tell me that I have. I find I go, and it's kind of what makes me really good at my role is I go chasing shiny things, and it's kind of what I have to do. Those shiny things are technology for me, but I have to temper that, and I'm at a stage of life where I have to temper that with discipline and go, there's a routine and a structure around how we should be doing this, and if I'm honest, if my wife was on here, if my honest voice of wisdom was on here, she'd be saying I need to be more disciplined, and I would totally agree with that. Yeah, and then that stems from not just work life, that stems from we spoke about it earlier, going to do exercise on a daily basis, those things. So, so if I'm honest, that's where it's at, and it's something that I've actually been working on over the past 2 weeks.
Mm.
The discipline is what maybe will allow me to drag it on for a bit more. I find that my life gets thrown every time I travel, and
Yeah, for sure, man. Me too. Me
I,
too.
I really struggle to maintain the same discipline on the road that I can do at home. It's easy at home, like
Yeah.
you do have that routine, but on the road, we were only at a conference 2 or 3 weeks ago together, and
Yeah.
that's not my normal routine. And then I go to Melbourne last week, and that's not my normal routine. So, you're not eating the same foods, you're not as being as healthy as what you could be, but you could. It's all about discipline, and that's where I think I could improve myself.
Yeah, and a little bit of foresight. Like I've to a couple of conferences last month up in Queensland, and on both occasions, my gym trainers remained untouched in my suitcase. Both occasions, for the whole time. So
And
yeah,
I get it.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, for sure.
And I get it. It's just so difficult to maintain the same discipline at home as on the road. Yeah, but
100%.
that would be an area I do need to improve.
Absolutely, me too. Peter Schravemade, look, I will make sure that everybody has access to links in the show notes for this great man. He is genuine, one of the genuine humans in the real estate industry, in the technology industry, in any industry really. So you'd be crazy to not at least reach out and say hi to this guy. Peter, it's an absolute, always a pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you so much for having this incredibly open and enlightening conversation, hopefully thought-provoking conversation for a few people. Team, as always, it's a pleasure to have you listen to us, and hopefully we've given you enough value for the time that you've given us. I'm sure that there is going to be a little period of self-reflection after this episode, and a bit of looking in the mirror and seeing if what you are portraying is something of confidence, or whether you want to try and build a bit more of a solid foundation of self-belief that's going to hold you in much better stead moving forward. Until next time, though, my friends, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, of course, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next episode of the High Performance Human Podcast. Take care, team.